welcome back to TWR. My name is Tavian, and this is my world of reptiles. I hope you are all doing well and taking care of yourselves. If this is your first time to my channel, thank you so much for swinging through. I hope you like what you see, and if you do, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, ding the bell, and make sure you get notified on future content. And if you are a returning subscriber, you rock. Thanks so much for coming through again. We are hanging out today with this gorgeous girl. She is a, orange glow motley sun tiger. She is beautiful. I do have a little short video of when we got these retics in. I've got a couple of videos that I've just kind of like gotten clips of and want to kind of post up, but I've just been too lazy to do that. So I'm gonna sit here at some point today and just kind of get those posted and scheduled to come out over the next couple of days, because it's been a while since I've really put any content up, like 2 weeks I think. So I apologize for that. But yeah, so we're hanging out with this girl today. And today I actually kind of want to talk about a human error that took place or kicked off really during the beginning of the 2020 pandemic, or throughout the 2020 pandemic, when everything was just still kind of pretty hot and we were all kind of isolated and secluded and couldn't do nothing. And it kind of started to show itself, really, just how bad it was now that the pandemic is coming to a tentative ending. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But, so, what I'm talking about is pandemic pets. All over the place, all across the board, the animal pet board. People decided that with nothing to do, with nowhere to go, with none to talk to, that it was a great idea to just go ahead and go out and get themselves a pet. And that's cats, dogs, birds, rodents, reptiles, amphibians, all across the board, inverts, all across the board. People went out and got themselves all sorts of pets. And unfortunately, now that the pandemic is ending, a lot of those pets are flooding back into shelters and reptile stores like this one. There's just I don't know if it was these are pets that maybe people thought they wanted before the pandemic and thought, well, since there's nothing else to do, I might as well get this pet now if this is going to be our new norm. But unfortunately, when life kicked back going again and we were all like able to actually go and do stuff and masks are starting to be lifted up and all that other stuff, that they realized actually it's not the pet that they really want. Whatever kept them from getting that pet before pandemic kicked back up, and they realized that they do not want that pet anymore, or they can't actually care for that pet anymore, or their lives are really just not fit for the pet now that the pandemic is not holding them at home. And it's really sad. It's really sad all across the board. It seems to be particularly more heartbreaking to people to see this happen to cats and dogs, because there's just this, known scientifically proven fact that dogs and cats can and do emotionally attach to their owners and do and can become super depressed and emotionally impacted when they are no longer with their owners and are forced to go and be with other people and find a whole new family that can seriously impact those creatures. What's unfortunate is that there seems to be this misconception that reptiles are not as affected by that. So people are more willing to give up their reptiles without having any major emotions behind it, without feeling like they're doing anything negative to their reptiles. Now, I'm not saying that there are cats and dog owners out there who are not also feeling the same thing. I'm sure there are people who are just like, I don't care. I'm just going to give it to the animal. It's not a big deal to the animal. It'll get over it. But mostly, I think even those who are giving up those cats and dogs realize that they are having an impact negatively on that animal. But what's unfortunate is that people don't seem to think that they're having that same impact on the reptiles that they're giving up. And this is just not true. Now, cats and dogs and mammals in general do tend to have a part of their brains that allow them to feel things like emotions and attachments, depression and all those things. And while snakes and reptiles in general don't necessarily have that same part of their brain that allows them to feel things in that sense, they do still feel stress. And when they are stressed, it does still have a physiological challenge on their body. It does physically affect their body. And that's a misconception I really want to change. No, they may not be able to love and attach and have emotions and bond in the same way that a mammal does. But reptiles do learn to trust. They learn to trust the environments that they are in. They learn to trust the people that are regularly interacting with them. They trust that where they are is safe and comfortable, and they grow used to that environment. So when they are suddenly yanked up out of that environment, it does create stress. Now, that's stress in all sorts of different ways. The stress of being taken out of their enclosure, stuck in a box or a bag, and then driven somewhere creates large amounts of stress for a reptile. And it doesn't matter whether that's a 5-minute drive or a 5-hour drive, that drive creates stress in that animal. Then they have to go through the stress of being in a new environment. Now, if you're like a lot of people, like we're here in the reptile store, so we get so many animals relinquished here. And so the issue is those animals are coming here, so now they have to endure the stress of being in this new environment. This environment, which is new to them, which comes with all sorts of people coming and going, and all sorts of new smells, all sorts of new scents. They are extremely stressed out by not knowing what is happening, where they are, and not knowing if this is the same safe place as where they were before. That creates stress. Then they're going to have to go through that stress all over again. Because then they're going to have to get taken right back out of the enclosure that they may or may not have finally actually gotten comfortable in while they were here. And then they're going to have to go back into a car again, go through that stressful drive, and then be put into a new environment with their new keepers. That's like 2-3 different levels of stress that snake or that reptile is now having to go through. And the different levels of stress can create all sorts of different things on their bodies, like I said. Snakes and other reptiles, they can go off of feeding. And when they stop feeding, then they obviously start losing weight, and then they get sick and starts creating all sorts of other health problems. Stress is the #1 killer for humans, and it is just as deadly for animals as it is for us. Stress can kill even the smallest organism that lives. That is just a fact. Because stress does have extreme impacts on living creatures, whether that's a blade of grass, a snake, a lizard, a frog, a cat, or a dog. Stress can extremely impact the physical nature of the animals that is actually, or the creature, or the living whatever that is actually experiencing the stress. So with this misconception that, if I just get a reptile, it's not a big deal when I have to go ahead and give it away because it's not going to affect it as much, that's so wrong. It absolutely is going to affect that reptile. It is absolutely going to affect that amphibian. It's going to affect that animal regardless of what it is. Now, I know we call this a hobby, and we call our groups of snakes a collection. But this is not just your typical hobby. This is not just like collecting baseball cards or comic books that are just super expensive. These are living and breathing creatures, and we need to treat them like living, breathing creatures. Not just because they don't have the same brain buildup as a mammal, so we don't need to treat them the same. We absolutely need to treat them the same. We need to treat them like they are living and breathing creatures. So I don't know how many people this is going to reach, but if you have a YouTube channel, I want you to make a video about this, or share this video. But we are not in this hobby just to throw away animals. It's not just something you can get into to pass your time and then get rid of the animals like it's not a big deal, because you get to move back on with your life and go on like nothing happened. But that animal has got to go through weeks, if not months, of stress and rehabilitation and readjustments before it can try to move on with its life and adjust there. And if everybody just decides to keep passing an animal along because they get it impulsively, can you imagine how many times an animal has to go through something like that? How many times a reptile has to go from a new home and adjusting to a new environment? I don't want to keep going on and on and on about this, but the fact of the matter is, these are living, breathing creatures. They're not just a throwaway thing to get into and then walk away from like it doesn't affect them, because it does. And we as human beings, as owners of these reptiles or whatever animal you're choosing to get, you are obligated to think about that animal's well-being, whether they're with you or not. And if you are not sure that you're going to be able to give them the long-term, for sure life, and you're just getting the tasks on time, you need to make the decision to not get the animal. So if we hit another lockdown, if we end up back into the deeper part of the pandemic again, where we're isolated, we're stuck at home, we got masks on, we can't do nothing. Do not go out and make that decision again to get another animal, because the chances are, once that pandemic lifts again, you are not going to have that same amount of time. You are not going to be as open as you think you were before to take on this pet. And what is going to happen is the same thing that is happening now. Cat shelters, dog shelters, all sorts of whatever other shelters, bird shelters, reptile stores, and all sorts of things. Craigslist starts getting flooded with all these pandemic pets that are all of a sudden no longer wanted, that suddenly people just don't have the time for. It was a year you had to take care of this animal. And in that time, you could have long decided that this was not something you could have had in the long run. So it is not a solid decision to go ahead and go get an animal because you're in a pandemic. You have got to think about your animals long term. This goes right up there with just like impulse buying, because that's essentially what it was. During all of the pandemic, most of the animals gotten were impulse buys. Something to pass their time. They're like, I am bored, I have nothing to do. Nothing is even open. Pet stores are open though, because the animals need their stuff, and that's an essential thing. So, whoa, look at this. They've got reptiles. They've got all sorts of stuff. Why not? I'm going to go ahead and get one of these. Just don't. Think about things in the long run, and I guarantee you that that animal that you're thinking about and yourself will appreciate that decision a lot more. You have to think about that animal. I mean, it's our duties as human beings to really consider how we impact the animals in our lives, whether that's just out in nature or animals that we bring into our home. We have an impact on them, and so we need to think about that long term. So don't just go get yourself a pandemic pet because, well, you got nothing else to do. When you want to pass time, these are not trading cards. These are not freaking comic books. These are not little cars that you get to build and then be over with, stick on the shelf and forget about. They're living, breathing creatures, and you got to think about them as such. So I'm going to go ahead and end it there. You all take care, love yourselves, love your loved ones, love your reptiles, and you all keep spreading those herbs.